The salvage beacon pulsed weakly through the debris field, a dying heartbeat in the vast darkness of space. Marcus Chen floated in his pressure suit among the twisted metal fragments, his tools magnetized to his belt, searching for anything worth recovering. He'd been working the Outer Rim salvage routes for 3 years now, ever since the incident at New Britannia Station. 3 years of silence, isolation, and the cold comfort of machinery that never asked questions or looked at him with pity. His scanner chirped, highlighting something massive buried beneath a collapsed cargo hauler. Marcus maneuvered his suit thrusters carefully, pushing aside a panel that had once been part of a ship's hull. What he found made him stop breathing for a moment. It was a vessel unlike anything in human design, sleek and organic in its curves, with hull plating that seemed to shift colors even in death. Alien. Definitely alien. Marcus had seen Zenthari ships before, mostly in military databases and warning bulletins. They were a species humans had encountered only twice in the past decade, both times ending in tense standoffs that nearly became shooting wars. The Galactic Council had warned humanity to keep their distance. The Zenthari, they said, were an old race, proud and dangerous, who viewed younger species as little more than insects buzzing around their territory. He should have reported it immediately, should have backed away and let the authorities handle it. But something made him move closer instead. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the fact that he had nothing left to lose. Or maybe it was because he recognized the particular way the hull had been breached, the signature of a plasma mine, the same kind that had killed his crew 3 years ago. The ship's emergency airlock was damaged but functional. Marcus cycled through, his heart hammering as the ancient mechanism hissed and groaned. The interior was dark, emergency lighting casting everything in a dim blue glow. He found her in what he assumed was the medical bay, suspended in some kind of stasis pod that flickered and sparked, clearly failing. She was tall, probably 7 feet if she stood, with skin that seemed to shimmer between deep purple and midnight blue. Her features were elegant and angular, with high cheekbones and a proud jaw. 4 arms lay folded across her chest, and her body was covered in what looked like biomechanical armor that had fused with her flesh. She wasn't moving, but the faint readings on the stasis pod suggested she was still alive, barely. Marcus stood there for a long moment, his rational mind screaming at him to leave. First contact protocols existed for a reason. The Zenthari had made it clear they wanted nothing to do with humanity. If he interfered, if he tried to help, he could start an interstellar incident. He could be labeled a traitor, a threat to human security. But then he looked at her face again, at the peaceful expression despite the obvious trauma her body had endured, and he thought about the 23 people who had died when his engineering bay had been hit. 23 souls he couldn't save because the hull breach had sealed him in a separate compartment. 23 voices that still haunted his dreams. His hands moved before his mind could stop them. He pulled out his portable diagnostic scanner and started analyzing the stasis pod's systems. The technology was far beyond human understanding, but engineering was engineering. Energy flowed in predictable patterns. Cooling systems followed logical designs. Life support had to maintain certain constants. It took him 6 hours of careful work, cross-referencing his own knowledge with the alien systems, improvising connections and bypasses. His suit's air supply warnings were screaming by the time he finally managed to stabilize the pod. The flickering stopped. The readings smoothed out. She would live, at least for now. Marcus made a decision that he knew he'd probably regret. He couldn't leave her here. The debris field was scheduled for collection and incineration by the salvage company in 48 hours. Everything would be destroyed, evidence of battles eliminated, space lanes cleared for traffic. She'd die, and no one would ever know. His own ship, the Rusty Prophet, was a modified long-haul freighter he'd purchased with his settlement money after leaving the military. It had enough cargo space to fit the entire stasis pod, and more importantly, it had a medical bay that he'd never bothered to remove from when the ship had served as a colony transport. Getting the pod aboard was a nightmare of physics and improvisation, but Marcus had always been good at solving impossible problems. It was why he'd been chief engineer on the New Britannia station before everything went wrong. 3 days into the journey to the nearest unregistered station, she woke up. Marcus was in the galley, forcing down another ration pack and trying not to think about the massive diplomatic incident sleeping in his cargo bay, when the ship's sensors alerted him to movement. He grabbed the plasma cutter he'd been keeping close, just in case, and made his way down the corridor. The stasis pod was open. She stood beside it, all 7 feet of her forearms moving in what seemed like an assessment of her surroundings. Her armor had retracted into patterns along her skin, revealing more of her natural form. Her eyes, he noticed, were a striking amber color, and they fixed on him with an intensity that made him take an involuntary step backward. They stared at each other for a long moment. Marcus kept the plasma cutter lowered but ready. He'd patched the translator software into his ship's systems, hoping it would work with Zenthari language patterns, but he had no idea if it would actually function. When she spoke, her voice was deep and melodious, with harmonics that seemed to resonate in his chest. The translator stuttered, then engaged. "You are human." It wasn't a question. But Marcus nodded anyway. "Yeah. I'm Marcus. I found your ship in a debris field. You were dying." Her amber eyes studied him, and he felt like she was looking straight through him, cataloging every detail, every weakness. "You brought me to your vessel. Your stasis pod was failing. I stabilized it, but I couldn't fix everything. I figured you'd have a better chance here than floating in space. My name is Narration of the 5th House of Zenthar." She moved closer, and Marcus fought the urge to back away. "You have violated 3 treaties by removing me from that debris field. You have potentially started a conflict between our species. The Zenthari do not accept charity from lesser beings." The translator couldn't hide the contempt in that last phrase. Marcus felt a familiar anger rise in his chest, the same anger that had gotten him discharged from the military. "Well, excuse me for saving your life, Your Highness. Next time I find someone dying in space, I'll make sure to check their species' diplomatic standing first." Something flickered in her expression. Surprise, maybe, or amusement. "You speak with disrespect. Most humans cower when addressing Zenthari. Most humans haven't spent 3 years alone in space with nothing but their own thoughts for company." Marcus lowered the plasma cutter completely, hooking it back onto his belt. "Look, I don't care about treaties or politics. I saw someone who needed help, and I helped. If that's a crime in your culture, then I guess I'm a criminal." Lyra Shan was quiet for a moment, her forearms moving in subtle patterns that the translator labeled as a gesture of consideration. "What happened to you, human Marcus? What drives you to risk so much for a stranger?" The question caught him off guard. He opened his mouth to give some dismissive answer, but the words died in his throat. Instead, he found himself saying, "I lost people. People I couldn't save. I guess I didn't want to lose anyone else." Her expression softened slightly, which he hadn't thought was possible. "You carry the weight of the fallen. I understand this burden." She looked around the cargo bay, at his ship, at the makeshift repairs he'd done to keep the rusty Prophet running. "Your vessel is damaged. Your systems are inefficient. You work with inferior tools and outdated technology." Marcus bristled at the criticism, but before he could respond, she continued. "Yet you managed to stabilize Zenthari medical technology that has confounded species far older than yours. You improvised solutions that should not have worked but did. You are skilled, human Marcus." It was probably the strangest compliment he'd ever received. "Thanks, I think. I owe you a life debt," Lyra Shan said, and suddenly her whole demeanor changed. Her forearms crossed in a complex pattern over her chest, and she bowed her head slightly. "By the laws of my people, my honor demands that I repay this debt. I am bound to you until balance is restored." Marcus felt panic rising. "Wait. No. That's not necessary. I didn't save you because I wanted something in return. The wanting is irrelevant. The debt exists." Her amber eyes met his again, and this time, there was something almost vulnerable in them. "I have nowhere else to go. My ship is destroyed. My house will assume I died with honor in battle. If I return and tell them I was saved by a human, the shame would be unbearable. Better to remain dead to them and alive here." Marcus ran a hand through his hair, trying to process everything. He'd gone from being completely alone to having a 7-foot alien warrior living on his ship, all in the span of a few minutes. Okay. Let's think about this rationally. You need time to recover. I need to complete this salvage run. How about we just take this one day at a time? No life debts. No honor codes. Just two people trying to survive in a universe that doesn't much care whether we do or not. Lyra Shan considered this, her head tilting in a way that reminded him oddly of a bird. You are strange. Human, Marcus, but perhaps this arrangement can work temporarily. She gestured to the medical equipment around them with one of her 4 arms. Your medical systems are primitive. I will need proper healing resources. Well, lucky for you, I'm pretty good at improvising. Marcus found himself almost smiling for the first time in months. And if you're going to be staying, you might as well help out. This ship doesn't run itself, and I could use someone who knows their way around advanced technology. You would trust me to work on your vessel? You said I saved your life. That's gotta count for something, right? Besides, you, Zenthari, are supposed to be all about honor. I figure if you were going to kill me and steal my ship, you would have done it already. Another flicker of what might have been amusement crossed her face. Your logic is sound, if simplistic. She moved toward the door, her movements graceful despite her size. Show me your engineering bay. If I am to be trapped on this vessel, I prefer it to be one that will not explode unexpectedly. Marcus led her through the ship, pointing out the various systems and modifications he'd made over the years. The rusty Prophet had been a wreck when he bought it, and he'd spent countless hours rebuilding and improving it. It was far from perfect, but it was his, and it kept him alive in the cold void of space. Lyra Shan examined everything with a critical eye, occasionally making comments that the translator labeled as highly technical. Most of it went over Marcus's head, but he got the general impression that she was both impressed and appalled by his work. Impressed that he'd managed to keep the ship running at all. Appalled at the methods he'd used to do it. In the engineering bay, she paused, one of her hands running along a particularly ugly weld seam. This section was damaged in combat. It wasn't a question, but Marcus answered anyway. Yeah. Plasma mine. 3 years ago. The same type of weapon that destroyed my ship. Yeah. They stood in silence for a moment. Two strangers connected by shared trauma, separated by everything else. Finally, Lyra Shan spoke again, her voice quieter than before. The battle that destroyed my vessel was an ambush. Pirates using stolen Zenthari weapons to attack a diplomatic convoy. I was the only survivor. Marcus looked at her. Really looked at her. And saw past the alien features and the warrior bearing to something he recognized intimately. Pain. Loss. The hollow emptiness of being the only one left alive when everyone else was gone. The mine that hit my station killed 23 people, he said. I was in a sealed compartment when it happened. By the time I got out, it was too late. Command said there was nothing I could have done. But that doesn't make it any easier. Lyra Shan's 4 arms moved in another complex pattern, this one labeled by the translator as a gesture of respect for the dead. We are both ghosts, then. Living when others do not. Yeah, Marcus said softly. I guess we are. Something shifted in that moment, some unspoken understanding passing between them. They were from different worlds, different species, different cultures. They should have been enemies, or at best, distant strangers, but circumstance and tragedy had brought them together. Two broken people floating in the vast emptiness of space. Lyra Shan broke the silence first. Your ship requires extensive repairs. With proper materials and time, I can restore it to functionality that exceeds its original specifications. You'd do that? I told you. I owe you a life debt. And, she hesitated, which seemed unusual for someone so confident, I have nothing else. No purpose. No direction. Perhaps fixing your ship will give me time to determine what comes next. Marcus nodded slowly. Then I guess we've got a deal. You help me keep this rust bucket flying, and I'll help you figure out your next move. They shook on it, or at least attempted to. Lyra Shan extending one of her 4 hands to clasp his single human one. Her grip was firm but careful, clearly conscious of her strength. As they stood there in the dim light of the engineering bay, surrounded by the humming machinery that kept them alive in the void, Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Hope. Small and fragile, but real. Maybe he wasn't meant to drift through space alone forever. Maybe there was still a reason to keep going, and maybe, just maybe, this strange alien woman who had crashed into his life was exactly what he needed to start putting his broken pieces back together. Neither of them knew what the future held. Neither of them could predict how this unlikely partnership would change them both. But for now, in this moment, they had found something they both desperately needed. Someone else who understood what it meant to survive, when surviving felt like the hardest thing in the universe. The weeks that followed established a routine that neither Marcus nor Narration had expected. She moved through the ship with the precision of a trained warrior. But Marcus quickly learned that she was far more than just a soldier. The Zenthari, it turned out, were raised from childhood to be masters of multiple disciplines: combat, engineering, diplomacy, art. All were considered essential to a complete education. Lyra could dismantle and rebuild a plasma conduit with 2 of her hands, while simultaneously running diagnostics on her wrist computer with a third and maintaining perfect balance as the ship maneuvered through an asteroid field. Marcus found himself both intimidated and fascinated by her capabilities. She worked tirelessly on the ship's systems, often disappearing into the engineering bay for hours at a time. He'd find her suspended in impossible positions, 3 arms working on different components while her 4th held her steady against the bulkhead. She never complained, never asked for breaks, never seemed to tire. It was almost inhuman, which he supposed made sense given that she literally wasn't human. But there were other moments, quieter ones, where the cracks in her armor began to show. He'd find her in the observation deck late at night, staring out at the stars with an expression of such profound loneliness that it made his chest ache. She'd been cast out from her people, voluntarily or not, and that exile clearly weighed on her. The Zenthari were a communal species, he learned, one that valued house and family above all else. To be alone was a fate worse than death in their culture. Marcus understood that feeling better than she probably realized. He'd been alone for 3 years, by choice, because facing other people meant facing their questions and their pity. It meant remembering what he'd lost. But now, with Lyra aboard, he found that the silence he'd wrapped himself in was starting to feel suffocating rather than comforting. They started talking during meals, at first just simple exchanges about the ship's systems or the salvage routes Marcus planned to take. But gradually, the conversations deepened. She told him about Zenthari culture, about the complex honor codes that governed their society, about the beauty of their homeworld with its twin moons and crystal forests. He told her about Earth, about the chaotic mess of human civilization, about the coffee shops and music, and the small pleasures that made life worth living. One evening, as they shared a meal in the galley, Marcus noticed that Lyra had barely touched her food. He'd been synthesizing nutrient paste based on her biological requirements, adjusting the formula each day to better match what she needed. It wasn't elegant, but it kept her alive. "Not hungry?" he asked, trying to keep his tone light. She looked down at the paste, one of her hands stirring it absently with a utensil. "It sustains me. That is sufficient. But it doesn't taste good. Taste is irrelevant when survival is the priority." Marcus set down his own fork, studying her. "You know, one of the things I learned after New Britannia Station is that just surviving isn't enough. You've got to have reasons to keep going. Small things, good food, stupid jokes, moments of beauty in all this darkness." Lyra amber eyes met his, and there was something raw in them. "What is the point of beauty when everything else is gone? My house believes me dead. My ship is destroyed. I exist in a state between worlds, belonging nowhere." "So you make a new place to belong," Marcus said quietly. "That's what I've been trying to do, anyway. Not doing a great job of it, admittedly. But I'm working on it. You do not understand. The Zenthari identity is tied to house and lineage. Without these things, I am incomplete, broken. Marcus felt a sudden surge of anger, not at her, but at the universe that seemed determined to convince people they were worthless. That's garbage. You're not broken. You're here. You're breathing. You're creating. I've watched you work on this ship, Lyra. The way you solve problems, the way you see connections I'd never notice. That's not broken. That's brilliant. She stared at him for a long moment, all four of her arms going very still. You truly believe this? Yeah, I do. And for what it's worth, I think this ship has never run better than it has since you came aboard. You've turned my barely functional rust bucket into something actually impressive. A strange expression crossed her face, something the translator couldn't quite categorize. You offer praise so easily. As if my worth is obvious. It is obvious. To me, anyway. Marcus shrugged, feeling suddenly self-conscious. Look, I'm not good at this whole emotional conversation thing. I spent 3 years avoiding them entirely, but I know what it's like to feel broken and useless. And I know that sometimes all it takes is one person telling you otherwise to make a difference. Lyra Shan was quiet for a long time. Then she picked up her utensil and took a deliberate bite of the nutrient paste. If I am to remain on this vessel, then perhaps we should improve the quality of sustenance. Nutrition alone is insufficient for well-being. Show me your food synthesis systems. I will optimize them. It was a small thing, but Marcus recognized it for what it was. An acceptance. A decision to stop merely surviving and start actually living. He grinned. Deal. And in return, you can teach me some of those Zenthari techniques. My welding is functional, but I've seen what you can do. It's like art. Art. They spent the next few hours in the galley, Lyra Shan analyzing the food synthesis systems, while Marcus attempted to explain human flavor preferences. It was ridiculous and awkward and wonderful. She didn't understand why humans liked sweet things so much. He couldn't comprehend how Zenthari could enjoy foods that tasted like metal and electricity. But they laughed, and for the first time since her arrival, Marcus saw her truly smile. The changes came gradually after that. Lyra Shan started emerging from the engineering bay more often, joining Marcus in the cockpit as he navigated through salvage zones. She had an incredible tactical mind, able to spot valuable debris that his sensors missed, predicting patterns in the wreckage fields that saved them hours of searching. Their efficiency doubled, then tripled. Marcus started making more money than he had in his entire 3 years of solo operation. But more than that, they became a team. When they encountered pirates trying to claim a salvage zone, Lyra Shan's combat training combined with Marcus's piloting skills to drive them off without firing a single shot. When the ship's reactor started developing a cascade failure, Marcus's improvisation and her theoretical knowledge prevented a meltdown. They moved together with an ease that surprised them both, anticipating each other's actions, covering each other's weaknesses. One night, after a particularly successful salvage run, Marcus broke out a bottle of actual whiskey he'd been saving. It was expensive. Real earth grain alcohol, not the synthetic stuff most spacers drank. He poured 2 glasses and offered one to Lyra Shan. She took it carefully, examining the amber liquid. This is intoxicating? Very, but in a good way, in moderation. She took a cautious sip, her expression cycling through several emotions before settling on something like appreciation. It burns, but pleasantly. Humans have strange definitions of enjoyment. Marcus laughed, the sound feeling foreign after so long. Yeah, we're a weird species, but we figured out how to make pretty decent booze. So we've got that going for us. They sat in the observation deck, watching the stars drift by, sipping whiskey in comfortable silence. Finally, Lyra Shan spoke. I was part of a diplomatic envoy when we were attacked. 57 Zenthari on that convoy. All dead, except me. Marcus didn't say anything, just listened. I was in the command ship when the first mine detonated. It breached our hull near the diplomatic chambers. Everyone there died instantly. I was thrown into an escape pod automatically. Our ship's AI recognizing that I was the highest-ranking survivor. I watched as the other ships were destroyed one by one. I could do nothing but watch. That's not your fault. Marcus said quietly. Logic says the same. But honor says differently. I was the commander. Their safety was my responsibility. I failed them. 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 Marcus took a long drink of whiskey, feeling the burn all the way down. After New Britannia Station, I told myself the same thing. I was the chief engineer. If I'd been faster, smarter, better, maybe I could have saved them. Maybe I could have prevented the mine from breaching the hull. Maybe. What changed? Nothing really. I still have those thoughts. Probably always will. But I realized something eventually. Carrying that guilt wasn't honoring the dead. It was just punishing myself. The people I lost wouldn't want that. They'd want me to keep going, to do better, to make sure their deaths meant something. Narration turned to look at him. All four of her hands wrapped around the whiskey glass. How do you make their deaths mean something? You live. You help people when you can. You try to make the universe a little bit better than it was before. He gestured around the ship. This might not seem like much, but every piece of salvage we recover is material that can be used to build something new. Every time we help someone, even in small ways, that's a choice to create rather than destroy. You are an idealist. Maybe. Or maybe, I'm just tired of being angry and sad all the time. Marcus finished his whiskey and set the glass down. You've done more for this ship in a few weeks than I managed in 3 years. You've made me remember that there are still things worth working toward. I'd say that's making a difference. Narration was silent for a long moment, her amber eyes reflecting the starlight. Then she did something unexpected. She reached out with one of her 4 hands and placed it gently on his shoulder. The touch was careful, conscious of the difference in their sizes and strengths, but it was warm and real. You saved my life, human Marcus. But perhaps you have given me something more valuable. A purpose again. A reason to continue. Marcus felt something tighten in his chest, emotion he'd been suppressing for years, threatening to overwhelm him. You did the same for me. Before you came aboard, I was just going through the motions. Now I actually look forward to waking up. They sat like that for a while, her hand on his shoulder, watching the universe spin around them. 2 broken souls, finding comfort in each other's presence. It wasn't romance, not yet anyway. It was something simpler and more profound. Recognition. They saw each other's pain and didn't flinch from it. They acknowledged each other's worth when their own cultures had discarded them. The next morning brought a challenge that would test everything they'd built. Marcus's long-range sensors picked up a distress beacon, human origin, coming from a disabled colony ship. Standard procedure would be to report it to the authorities and move on. Rescue operations were handled by specialized teams, and solo salvagers like Marcus had no business getting involved. But when they analyzed the signal, they realized something was wrong. The ship had been attacked, not disabled by mechanical failure, and it was drifting toward a dead zone where no signals would reach, where help would never find it. If Marcus reported it through normal channels, by the time rescue arrived, everyone aboard would be dead. Marcus looked at Narration, seeing his own conflict reflected in her expression. This wasn't their problem. It was risky, potentially deadly. They had no obligation to help. How many life signs? Narration asked quietly. Marcus checked his sensors. 317, mostly families. Colony ship was headed for the Titan settlement. Can we reach them before they drift beyond communications range? If we push the engines hard, we'd make it with maybe an hour to spare. Narration's 4 arms moved in a complex pattern he'd learned to recognize as determination. Then we should proceed. You taught me that making deaths meaningful requires choosing life when possible. 317 lives are worth the risk. Marcus felt a fierce pride swell in his chest. Yeah, they are. Let's go save some people. They pushed the rusty prophet harder than Marcus had ever dared before, the ship groaning and shuddering but holding together thanks to Naration's improvements. As they approached the colony ship, They could see the damage. Plasma burns scarred the hull. Entire sections were vented to space. It was a miracle anyone was still alive. The rescue operation was a nightmare of logistics and improvisation. The colony ship's docking ports were destroyed, so they had to cut through the hull manually. Marcus coordinated evacuation procedures, while Lyra Shan used her strength and extra limbs to literally carry people through dangerous sections. She moved through the damaged ship like a force of nature, her armor deployed to protect her from vacuum exposure, pulling survivors from collapsed compartments and sealed sections. Marcus watched her work and saw something beautiful. This proud warrior who'd been told she was worthless without her house, who'd believed herself broken and incomplete, was saving hundreds of lives with a grace and efficiency that left him awed. She wasn't broken. She was magnificent. The evacuation took 14 hours. They packed people into every available space on the Rusty Prophet, far exceeding the ship's rated capacity. Life support strained under the load, but held. Marcus rerouted power, boosted oxygen recycling, did everything he could to keep everyone alive long enough to reach the nearest station. And through it all, Lyra Shan worked tirelessly. She comforted terrified children with a gentleness that contradicted her warrior appearance. She helped injured colonists with medical knowledge that surprised Marcus. She moved through the crowded ship, bringing calm and confidence to people who had lost everything. When they finally docked at Meridian Station and transferred the survivors to proper care, Marcus was exhausted beyond words. He and Lyra Shan collapsed in the galley, too tired to even make it to their respective quarters. "We did it," Marcus said, his voice hoarse. 317 lives saved. Lyra Shan's voice held something like wonder. "I have never accomplished something so significant." Marcus looked at her, at this incredible being who'd crashed into his life and changed everything. "You're a hero, Lyra. Those people are alive because of you. Because of us," she corrected. "We are a team, human Marcus. Your skill and my strength. Together we achieved what neither could alone." And there it was, the simple truth that had been building since the moment they met. They were better together, stronger together, complete in a way neither had been alone. Marcus felt tears prick his eyes, emotion overwhelming his exhaustion. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for staying, for helping me remember what it means to be alive." Lyra Shan reached out and took his hand in one of hers, the gesture now familiar and comforting. "Thank you for saving me. Not just my life, but my spirit. You showed me that worth is not determined by titles or houses. It is determined by actions and choices." They sat there in the quiet galley, hands clasped, two ghosts who had found their way back to the world of the living. The future was uncertain. There would be challenges ahead, questions about their partnership, diplomatic complications from a human and Zenthari working together. But for now, in this moment, they had each other and the knowledge that they'd made a real difference. Marcus squeezed her hand gently. "Partners?" Lyra Shan's grip tightened in return, all four of her arms moving in a pattern he'd learned meant absolute commitment. "Partners. In all things. Human Marcus. You have my loyalty until the stars grow cold." And Marcus knew, with the certainty that came from deep in his soul, that he'd found something he'd thought lost forever. Not just a purpose, but a connection. Not just a reason to survive, but a reason to truly live. Together, they would face whatever came next. Together, they were unstoppable. The rescue of the colony ship changed everything. Within hours of their arrival at Meridian Station, news of their actions spread across the communications networks. A human salvager and a Zenthari warrior working together to save 300 lives was the kind of story that captured imaginations across multiple species. Reporters clamored for interviews. Station authorities wanted statements. The survivors themselves wanted to thank their rescuers personally. Marcus hated every second of the attention. He'd spent 3 years avoiding the spotlight, avoiding questions, avoiding anything that reminded him of who he'd been before New Britannia Station. But Lyra Shan seemed to take it all in stride, her warrior training giving her the composure to handle diplomatic conversations with ease. She deflected the more invasive questions, redirected attention away from Marcus when she sensed his discomfort, and managed to project an image of calm competence that made them both look like heroes rather than lucky salvagers who'd been in the right place at the right time. But the attention brought problems too. Within 2 days of docking at Meridian Station, they received an official communication from the Zenthari High Council. The message was formal and cold, demanding an explanation for why one of their presumed dead warriors was alive and working with a human. They wanted Narration to report to the nearest Zenthari embassy immediately for debriefing. Marcus watched her read the message, saw the way her forearms tensed, the way her amber eyes went distant and troubled. "What are you going to do?" he asked quietly. Narration was silent for a long moment, her fingers drumming a complex pattern on the table. "If I return, they will interrogate me. They will want to know everything about the attack, about my survival, about you, and then they will make a decision about my fate. What kind of decision? Whether I can return to my house with honor, or whether I must undergo purification trials to prove my worth." She looked at him, and there was fear in her eyes that he'd never seen before. "These trials are designed to break warriors who have been compromised. Many do not survive them. Those who do are never the same." Marcus felt anger rising in his chest. "That's insane. You haven't done anything wrong. You survived an attack. You've been helping people." "I survived when others died. In Zenthari culture, that requires explanation. And I have been living among humans, learning your ways, adopting your perspectives. Some will see this as corruption, as weakness. There's nothing weak about you." Marcus stood up, pacing the small galley. "You saved 300 people, Lyra. You turned my barely functional ship into something incredible. You've done more good in a few months than most people do in a lifetime. Your opinion is not shared by my people. Then your people are wrong." Marcus stopped pacing and looked at her directly. "You don't have to go back. You can stay here. Stay with me." Lyra Shan's expression shifted through several emotions he couldn't quite read. "You would harbor a fugitive from the Zenthari High Council? The diplomatic implications would be severe. Your entire species could suffer consequences. Let them try. Humanity didn't get where we are by backing down when threatened." Marcus moved closer to her, his voice intense. "I'm not going to let them take you, not after everything we've built here. You're my partner, Lyra. That means something to me." She stood, her full height making her tower over him, but her expression was soft rather than intimidating. "You would risk so much for me?" In a heartbeat. Marcus reached out and took one of her 4 hands in his. "You gave me back my life. You made me remember what it means to care about something other than just surviving another day. I'm not letting you go without a fight." Lyra Shan's other 3 hands moved in a pattern he'd learned meant deep emotion, joy, mixed with sorrow. "You are a remarkable being, human Marcus, but I cannot let you sacrifice your future for mine. It's not a sacrifice if it's what I want." They stood there in the galley, hands clasped, the weight of the decision hanging between them. Finally, Lyra Shan spoke again. "There may be another option. One that requires courage and risk, but offers a path forward for both of us." Marcus listened as she explained. In Zenthari culture, there was an ancient tradition called the Oath of Partnership. It was a bond between 2 warriors who had proven themselves in battle together, a recognition that their combined strength exceeded the sum of their individual abilities. Such partnerships transcended house affiliations and even species boundaries. If they could convince the High Council that they qualified for this oath, it would grant Lyra Shan the right to remain with Marcus without dishonor. The catch was that they'd have to prove their worth. They'd need to demonstrate to the Zenthari that their partnership served the greater good, that it brought honor rather than shame, and they'd need to do it in a way that couldn't be disputed or dismissed. "So we need to do something impressive," Marcus said, his mind already working through possibilities. "Not just impressive, legendary. Something that will force even the most conservative members of the High Council to acknowledge our value." Marcus grinned, the expression feeling more natural now than it had in years. "Well, lucky for us, we're pretty good at the impossible. Let's start planning. Over the next week, They researched and prepared. The sector they operated in had no shortage of problems that needed solving. Pirate raids were increasing. Several colonies were struggling with failing infrastructure. Ancient derelict ships from pre-contact wars posed navigation hazards. But none of these felt significant enough to sway the Zenthari High Council. Then they heard about the Shattering. The Shattering was what locals called a region of space where a massive battle had taken place decades earlier. Hundreds of ships from multiple species had torn each other apart in a conflict whose cause was long forgotten. The debris field stretched for thousands of kilometers, an impenetrable maze of wreckage and active ordnance. It was a death trap that had claimed dozens of salvage vessels over the years. But buried somewhere in that chaos was the Valdris, a Zenthari dreadnought that had gone down with nearly 1,000 warriors aboard. It was considered sacred ground by the Zenthari. A tomb ship that contained the honored dead. Several attempts had been made to recover the ship or at least retrieve the remains, but the danger was too great. The Valdris had been abandoned to the void, a source of ongoing shame for the Zenthari military. If they could recover the Valdris, if they could bring home those honored dead, it would be an achievement that the High Council couldn't ignore. It's suicide, Marcus said, staring at the charts of the Shattering. The debris density alone would tear us apart. And that's before we factor in the unexploded ordnance, the radiation, and whatever pirates are using the field as a base. Yes, Narration agreed. It is likely suicide. But it is also exactly the kind of impossible task that would prove our worth beyond question. Marcus looked at her, seeing the determination in her amber eyes. You really want to do this. I want to honor the dead who have waited too long for peace. I want to show my people that I am still worthy, even if I walk a different path. And I want to build a future where you and I can work together without fear or shame. She placed all 4 of her hands on the table, leaning forward. But I will not ask you to risk your life for my honor. This is my burden, not yours. That's where you're wrong, Marcus said, his own determination rising to match hers. We're partners, remember? Your burdens are my burdens. Your fights are my fights. If we're going into the Shattering, we're doing it together. Lyration's expression shifted into something Marcus had come to treasure, a smile that was uniquely hers, fierce and beautiful. Then let us plan the impossible, partner. They spent days preparing. Marcus modified the Rusty Prophet's shields to handle the intense radiation levels in the Shattering. Lyration programmed navigation algorithms that could calculate safe paths through the debris in real time. They stockpiled supplies, ran simulations, and planned for every contingency they could imagine. The night before they departed, they sat together in the observation deck one last time. The stars seemed brighter somehow, more vivid. Marcus wondered if it was because he was finally feeling alive again, or if it was just the knowledge that this might be the last time he saw them. Are you afraid? Lyration asked quietly. Terrified, Marcus admitted, but also excited. Is that weird? No, I feel the same. This fear is different from the fear I felt in the escape pod, watching my convoy die. That was helpless fear. This is the fear that comes before great action. It means we are alive and aware of the stakes. Marcus nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Can I ask you something? Anything. Do you regret staying? Do you wish you'd gone back to your people when you had the chance? Lyration turned to look at him fully, all 4 of her arms moving in a pattern that meant absolute honesty. Not for a single moment. You showed me that worth is not given by others. It is created through our choices and actions. With you, I have chosen to help rather than harm, to build rather than destroy, to live with purpose rather than merely exist. I would not trade this for all the honors my house could bestow. Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. You know, when I pulled you out of that debris field, I thought I was just doing the right thing. I didn't expect to find a friend, a partner, someone who understands me better than anyone ever has. The universe works in mysterious ways. Perhaps we were meant to find each other. 2 broken souls, repairing each other piece by piece. I'm still pretty broken, Marcus said with a slight laugh. As am I. But we are broken in ways that fit together. Your weakness is my strength. My gaps are filled by your presence. Together, we are whole. They sat in silence for a while, watching the stars, drawing comfort from each other's presence. Finally, Marcus spoke again. Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know something. These past months have been the best of my life. You gave me back hope. You made me believe I could be more than just a ghost haunting a dead ship. Even if everything goes wrong, even if we don't make it back, I don't regret a single moment. Narration reached out and pulled him close, her forearms wrapping around him in an embrace that felt safe and warm despite the alien nature of it. We will make it back, human Marcus. We have come too far and overcome too much to fail now. But I share your sentiment. You are the greatest gift the universe has given me. My partner, my friend, my reason to keep fighting. They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other against the cold void of space. Two souls who had found each other against impossible odds. Whatever the next day brought, they would face it together. The journey into the shattering was every bit as terrifying as they'd anticipated. The debris was so dense that their sensors could barely penetrate more than a few hundred meters ahead. Active ordnance pinged their shields regularly, forcing them to navigate a constantly shifting maze of danger. The rusty prophet groaned and shuddered under the strain, but held together thanks to Lyrishan's improvements. Marcus piloted with a skill born from desperation and determination, his hands dancing across the controls, making micro-adjustments every few seconds. Lyrishan managed the shields and sensors, her forearms allowing her to monitor multiple systems simultaneously. They moved as one, their communication reduced to single words and gestures, each trusting the other completely. It took them 18 hours to reach the Valdris. When they finally located the dreadnought, Marcus understood why recovery had seemed impossible. The ship was massive, over 2 kilometers long, and it had embedded itself deep within a cluster of smaller wrecks. Ordnance surrounded it like a minefield. Even approaching seemed suicidal. We can't get the whole ship out, Marcus said, his voice tight with stress. It's too big, too damaged, too embedded. Then, we do what we came to do, Lyrishan said. We honor the dead. We document their final resting place. We retrieve what identification markers we can. We prove that we cared enough to try when everyone else had given up. They spent hours working in the shadow of the dead dreadnought. Marcus maneuvered the rusty prophet with impossible precision, while Lyrishan went Eva, using her strength and armor to access the Valdris directly. She moved through the dead ship with reverence, collecting identification tags, recording final logs, documenting everything with a care that spoke to how much this meant to her. When she returned, she was carrying something Marcus didn't expect. It was a crystalline structure, about the size of his fist, glowing with a soft internal light. The ship's memory core, she explained. It contains the final moments of the crew. Their last words. Their final acts of courage. That's incredible. More than incredible. This is proof of their honor. Their families will finally know how they died. The High Council will have to acknowledge this recovery. We have succeeded, Marcus. But their celebration was premature. As they began their exit from the shattering, their sensors detected something new. A pirate vessel, massive and heavily armed, had followed them in. It seemed they weren't the only ones interested in the Valdris. The pirates had waited for someone else to do the dangerous work of location and recovery. And now they intended to steal what Marcus and Lyrishan had risked their lives to obtain. The battle that followed was desperate and chaotic. The pirates had superior weapons and armor, but the rusty prophet had something they didn't. 2 pilots who moved as one, who trusted each other completely, who refused to give up. Marcus flew the ship through maneuvers that should have been impossible, using the debris field itself as cover and weapon. Lyrishan managed their limited weapons with precision, targeting the pirate ship's engines and sensors, rather than trying to overpower its shields. The fight raged for over an hour, both ships taking heavy damage. The rusty prophet was on the verge of catastrophic failure. Life support was failing. Shields were at 10%. But Marcus had one more trick, one desperate gambit that might just work. "Hold on!" he shouted, spinning the ship in a way that would have made him sick if he wasn't running on pure adrenaline. He aimed the rusty prophet directly at a cluster of ancient ordnance he'd marked earlier, then cut the engines completely. They coasted forward on momentum alone, barely moving, barely registering on sensors. The pirate ship, seeing what they thought was a dead vessel, moved in for the kill. They were focused entirely on the rusty prophet, on claiming their prize. They didn't notice the ordnance until it was too late. Marcus fired their last torpedo, not at the pirate ship, but at the ordnance cluster. The explosion was massive, a chain reaction that lit up the shattering like a newborn star. The pirate ship was caught in the blast, its shields overloading, its hull breaching in a dozen places. The vessel spun out of control, crashing into the debris field and breaking apart. The shockwave hit the rusty prophet hard, but they'd been ready for it. Shields angled to deflect rather than absorb. They tumbled through space. Alarms screaming, systems failing. But they were alive. They'd survived. It took them 3 days to limp out of the shattering. 3 days of constant repairs, of pushing failing systems beyond their limits, of sheer stubborn refusal to die so close to success. When they finally cleared the debris field and sent out their distress beacon, they were running on emergency power and recycled air. The Zenthari response fleet arrived within hours of receiving their signal. Marcus had never been so happy to see alien warships in his life. They were brought aboard the flagship, the memory core and documentation secured by warriors who moved with a reverence that spoke to the significance of what they'd accomplished. The High Council hearing that followed was held aboard the flagship, transmitted across the Zenthari communication network so that the entire species could witness it. Marcus and Lyra Shan stood before the 7 council members, their bodies battered but their spirits unbroken. The eldest council member, a warrior whose armor was decorated with centuries of service, spoke first. "Lyra Shan, of the 5th House. You were believed dead. You survived when others did not. Explain." Lyra Shan stood tall, all 4 of her arms held in a position of respect but not submission. "I survived through fortune and the intervention of human Marcus Chen. I chose to honor that gift of life by living with purpose. Together, we have saved 317 colonists. We have recovered the memory core and identification markers of the Valdris crew. We have proven that honor is not bound by species, but by action. You speak of honor while abandoning your house, while living among humans. This is not the Zenthari way. Then perhaps the Zenthari way must evolve." Lyra Shan's voice was firm. "The universe is changing. We cannot remain isolated in our honor codes while the rest of the galaxy moves forward. Human Marcus taught me that worth is determined by what we do, not what we are called, and together, we have done things neither could achieve alone." The council members conferred quietly. Then another spoke. A warrior with scars that suggested countless battles. "The human. What does he have to say?" Marcus stepped forward, his heart pounding. He'd faced down pirates and navigated death traps, but standing before these ancient warriors was somehow more terrifying. "I'm nobody important, just a salvager who couldn't leave someone to die. But working with Lyra has taught me that the best of us comes out when we work together. When we see past our differences to recognize our shared humanity. Or shared sentience, I guess, since we're different species." A ripple of what might have been amusement went through the council. The eldest member spoke again. "You claim partnership with Lyra Shan. You understand what this means? You would be bound to Zenthari honor codes. You would be expected to uphold the standards of our warriors. You would be judged by our laws, as well as your own. I understand, and I accept." Marcus looked at Lyra Shan, seeing pride and affection in her amber eyes. "She's saved my life in more ways than just the physical. If binding myself to her codes is what it takes to stand beside her, then I'll do it gladly." The council conferred again, this time for several long minutes. Finally, the eldest member stood, a gesture that brought absolute silence to the chamber. "The recovery of the Valdris memory core is an achievement that will be remembered for generations. The rescue of 317 lives demonstrates exceptional courage and skill. And the partnership between human and Zenthari, while unprecedented, has proven its value beyond question. Marcus felt hope surge in his chest. We recognize the oath of partnership between Lyra Shan of the Fifth House and Marcus Chen of Earth. You are bound by honor and deed. Your actions reflect upon both your species. Go forth and continue to bring honor through your service. The Zenthari acknowledge you as equals, as warriors, as partners. The chamber erupted in a gesture Marcus learned meant approval and respect. All the Zenthari present, raising their forearms in complex patterns. Lyra Shan grabbed his hand, squeezing it tight, and Marcus saw tears streaming down her face. They'd done it. Against impossible odds, against cultural barriers and diplomatic complications, they'd proven that they belonged together, that their partnership was real and valuable and worthy of recognition. Later, back aboard the Rusty Prophet, they sat in their usual spot in the observation deck. The ship had been repaired by the Zenthari engineers, improved beyond even what Lyra Shan had managed. It was no longer a rust bucket held together by improvisation. It was a vessel worthy of the partnership it carried. We did it, Marcus said, still not quite believing it. We did. Lyra Shan agreed. But this is not an ending, partner. It is a beginning. Now we can truly work towards something greater. What did you have in mind? She smiled, that fierce, beautiful expression he'd come to cherish. We show the galaxy what human and Zenthari can accomplish together. We bridge the divide between our species. We help those who need it. We build something new and wonderful from the broken pieces we started with. Marcus laughed, the sound full of genuine joy. Sounds impossible. We specialize in the impossible, remember? They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars, two souls who had found each other in the vastness of space. He had fixed her shattered ship, pulling her from the wreckage and giving her a chance at life. She had mended his broken soul, showing him that purpose and connection were still possible even after losing everything. Together, they were complete. Together, they would change the galaxy. And it all started with one simple choice: to help a stranger, when it would have been easier to walk away. That choice had led to a partnership that transcended species and culture, that proved the best of both humanity and the Zenthari could create something greater than either alone. As Marcus reached out and took Lyra Shan's hand once more, he knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Two broken souls, repaired and strengthened by each other's presence, ready to show the universe what true partnership could accomplish. The stars seemed brighter than ever before, full of possibility and promise. And for the first time in 3 years, Marcus Chen looked toward the future, not with dread or resignation, but with hope, real, genuine, beautiful hope. Their journey was just beginning.